So hello, my name is Chris Harwood, and I am happy to welcome you to our program this afternoon. I'm the president of the New York chapter of the Czechoslovak Society of Arts and Sciences, and we are back on Zoom, both because of the pandemic and because we have guests who are more easily able to join us in this fashion. And we have a program today which is we think of as being part of the larger commemorations that began last year with the 100th anniversary of the publication of the first volume of the Good Soldier Švejk, and that are continuing this year, and that will probably culminate next year in 23, when we have the 100th anniversary both of the death of Jaroslav Hašek, author of the Good Soldier Švejk, and the 100th anniversary of the publication of the final volume, or the last volume that was completed of the Good Soldier Švejk. So before we get to today's presentation, I would like to do some general introductions, if I may. So give me just a moment to share my screen. We are, and we're very happy to have the support of Bohemian Benevolent and Literary Association. They support all of our programming. Please check us out on social media and check out other events supported by the BBLA. And of course, as always, I'd like to encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which has given us grants to support the complicated process of getting videos of our events up on YouTube. And so you can check our catalog there. And before I introduce our speaker for today, I just wanted to related announcements. One is that, as many of you know, a week ago, I believe, we lost Radko Pitlik, who was perhaps the most prolific scholar of the work of Jaroslav Hašek, and who, if I'm not mistaken, was born in the same year as our speaker today. And so we just take a moment to remember Radko Pitlik and his tremendous contribution to the understanding that we all have of Hašek and his work. And I would also like to announce that we have a couple of very distinguished guests in our audience today. They are Jomar Hensi, who is president of the International Jaroslav Hašek Society. He is checking in today from Olomouc, where he lives. And we also have in our audience today, Richard Hašek, the grandson of Jaroslav Hašek. So we're very honored to have both of these guests with us today. And it's possible that at the end of the discussion, they may be able to contribute some insights into the discussion that will emerge. But now it's my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, Paul Shaman. He was born in Istanbul in 1928 and then grew up in Prague, Czechoslovakia. He holds a PhD in classical Turkish, Persian, and Arabic from Charles University. And prior to emigrating in 1960, he taught at the Oriental Institute in Prague and published extensively on Central Asian folklore, both for academic journals and also for radio and television for a general audience. In emigration, he initially worked for American intelligence in Germany for 2 years. And then after moving to the United States, he was appointed a professor in the Foreign Languages Department of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where he taught until the 1990s. Now retired, he lives in Asheville, North Carolina. And we're very pleased to have Paul Shaman joining us today to present his talk on debunking the myth about Jaroslav Hašek's day. Thank you, Paul. Yes, you may start. We hear you.
Okay, I see you. I thought I would see myself. When Jaroslav Hašek's Adventures of the Good Soldier Švejk was published in 1922, the posters advertising the book announced the adventures of the Good Soldier Švejk during the World War and the Civil War here and in Russia. But the novel, as we know it, ends with the First World War. The rest was never completed, leaving the novel as only a torso. There is a simple explanation. When he was resuming work on the novel, Hašek suddenly died in January 1923 at the age of 39. Therefore, we will never really know what the completed novel would have looked like. Why did this happen? Jaroslav Hašek drank himself to death. This is the explanation that Czech literary historians have accepted for almost 100 years now to explain his sudden passing. But this explanation is not tenable. There is simply no medically plausible way his death can be attributed to alcoholism. All existing evidence of Hašek's activities and of his mental and physical condition in the last months and weeks of his life exclude any possibility that cirrhosis of the liver was his cause of death. Even Hašek's doctors at the time did not cite alcoholism. The cause of death listed on his official death certificate is heart paralysis. The death protocol written by Hašek's personal physician says nothing more than that his heart had stopped. A conspicuously vague diagnosis. Together with the late Professor Dr. Frank Loskot, a court-appointed medical expert in internal medicine in Germany, I have reviewed the documentable facts surrounding the end of his life, and we have come to the conclusion that a serious reconsideration of events is due. My hope is to bring attention to the incompleteness of what we currently know and to invite renewed discussion of a question that is of such importance in the history of Czech letters. As we know, Jaroslav Hašek served in Austro-Hungarian uniform in the First World War. He was taken to Russia as a prisoner of war, and while there, he joined first the Czechoslovak legions and then the Red Army. While in Russia, Hašek was able through discipline and well as through genuine political conviction to work his way up the hierarchy of Soviet officialdom and eventually rise to the level of commissar in the Fifth Army in Siberia. Before he achieved world fame as a literary author, Hašek had already made a remarkable career in the Red Army. During this time, Hašek behaved very differently from the jovial bohemian that he is known as. As Radko Pitlik documents, for example, he is known to have abstained from alcohol for sustained periods while he was in Russia, several years. When labor unrest in the industrial Kladno region of Czechoslovakia began to generate a pro-Bolshevik movement in the early 1920s, the communist authorities agreed to Hašek's wish to be sent as an agent to advance the Soviet cause. So when Hašek returned after the war, he wasn't just a soldier. returning home like any other. He was in the position to spearhead the communist cause in Czechoslovakia. Because of his colorful past, he was sent there with a new identity, using the false name Josef Steidl. However, once he was home, he immediately dropped the cover and became Jaroslav Hašek again. He began writing again. He became a regular presence in his favorite pubs, and he even performed in the cabaret The Red Seven, where he entertained his audiences with humorous narrations about his stay in Russia. Despite taking no political action whatsoever on behalf of the Soviets, and despite his satirical creativity, he never politically criticized the USSR. The fact that the communist officials chose Hašek for such a responsibility suggests that they deemed him to be mentally and physically sound enough to represent their cause effectively. Did he become an alcoholic during the 2 years between his return to Czechoslovakia and his death? Already the fact that he was able to abstain from alcohol at will while in the Soviet Union means that as of 1920, he was by definition not an alcoholic. An alcoholic cannot stop drinking. This is the first condition you will find in any medical books. Jaroslav Hašek did drink much and fondly when he wished to and when he was in company. But his health, as Professor Loskot and I have found, was overall sound, and specific medical signs of alcoholism are entirely absent. His sound condition can be documented up to the last days of his life. Let me give examples. On August 14th, 1922, Hašek, his wife Alexandra, and a young Russian friend of hers undertook a long excursion from Prague to Pacov, nad Vlašim, and Vlašim. From Vlašim, he mailed a postcard to Alexander in Wald, a pub owner in Lipnice, in which he laughs about the physical exhaustion of his companions. Quote, "The women accompanying me can't even cry anymore. They are so tired. We covered 37 kilometers today. I am dragging them onto Vlašim." Hašek himself, though, complained of no fatigue at all. This was only 4.5 months before his death on January 3rd. In a letter to his friends dated September 26, 1922, Hašek writes about repairs on his house that he had recently purchased and was preparing to move into. He talks about the pleasant weather and the beautiful views he's enjoying. Health problems are not mentioned. This was 3 months before his death. In his book of memoirs, Hašek's friend František Langer mentions an episode in which his cousin encounters Hašek in a Lipnice pub. Among a large circle of people, Hašek was sitting at the head of the table, looking well, boasting that he was able to go for walks even during the ugly November and December weather, and behaving overall as a perfect host. By his appearance and demeanor, he made a good impression on Langer's cousin. That was several weeks before his death. At Christmas, that is to say, very shortly before his death, there was freshly fallen snow, and he sent his assistant Štěpánek, to whom he had been dictating Švejk, to buy a sled so that they could ride on the snow like in good old times. After doing the hard work of shoveling a path in the snow around his house, he announced that the fresh winter air suited him and that this would be his job from then on. Only after the holidays, he started feeling worse. In a letter to his friend Oldřich Šikýř from December 26, 1922, Hašek jokingly reprimanded him for not visiting him. The sole mention of his health in this statement, "I have rheumatism," this was 1 week before he died. As we know, he mentioned his rheumatism several times, and even in the first pages of the Adventures of Švejk, we can see Lada's drawing Švejk, how he rubs his foot, his leg with opodildok. On the following day, December 27, 1922, the district physician, Dr. Resser, makes a diagnosis of a combined illness of the heart, nerves, and lungs, and gives Hašek a most unusual doctor's order to make a trip to Spain without delay in order to cure his ailments. Hašek applied for a passport in order to make the trip, and in his letter to the authorities requesting it, he explains, quote, "I plan to reside with my brother-in-law Bejček in Barcelona so that I may receive appropriate home care and medical care, and I hope that the mild climate will allow me to come back recovered before 3 months have passed," unquote. At this point, his ailment appeared to have been mild enough that basic care and Mediterranean air would cure them. 1 week later, though, he dies. On January 3rd, 1923, only 1 hour before his death, Hašek was in clear mental state and still able to get up from his bed and attempt to write his last will. Only because his hands were shaking did he have to dictate it to the doctor, the same way that he had recently begun dictating Švejk to his friend Clement. In her account of his last days, Hašek's maid, Terezie Špinarová, writes the following. Jaroslav Hašek was at that time in full consciousness. He spoke as he usually did. he dictated his last will aloud without having to stop and think much, the way he usually dictated to his secretary. He prepared leg compresses for Jaroslav Hašek, and before he dictated his last will, he had no fever, only around 7:30 in the morning. Approximately 1 hour before his death, Hašek became unconscious, and at approximately 8:30, he passed away. I do not remember him complaining about pains. When he signed his last will, it was approximately 1 hour past midnight. In light of these accounts, we can conclude that for most of the second half of 1922, except for temporary indispositions, he was overall in quite sound physical condition. If Hašek had suffered from cirrhotic or inflammatory degenerative liver damage, it would have been physically impossible for him to perform the way he did in the summer. Such exertion would have been absolutely out of the question. Until November and December of that year, he appears to have been of clear mind, and nowhere is there any mention of his taking any medication stronger than aspirin. In spite of his drinking habits, there is no mention of any telltale symptoms that would indicate liver disease. A cirrhotic liver leaves clear and visible signs during the months and weeks prior to death, including changes in the color of the skin and an odor which becomes noticeable around the sick person. Yet nobody in Hašek's environment observed any of these symptoms as late as 1922. Not even the physicians who examined him. If liver disease had been the cause of death, its symptoms would have had to set in gradually. There is no way it could have struck in few short days from the end of December 1922 to the beginning of January 1923. But the dramatic decline of his health and his death happened only a few days, in only a few days. Based on the above, the notion that Hašek drank himself to death, I must say, before getting involved in this, I called the Charles University and asked to speak with Bohemistics. And asked the secretary if I could talk to a member of the faculty. She told me, here is an assistant. And I told him, you know, we got together with friends yesterday evening. We were talking about Hašek, and we could not agree what was the reason. Why did he die? And he told me, no to víte, on se ožral k smrti. He drank himself to death. Then I called the Academy of Sciences, Slavistics. They told me the same thing in more polite words. Based on the above, the notion that Hašek drank himself to death is simply impossible. So what do we know about the way he actually died? We have accounts of him gasping for air and exhibiting neurological symptoms such as tremor and pains. Of course, it is impossible to know with any certainty what kind of illness could have caused this. Professor Loskot's analysis of the documentation available to him led him to conjecture that one possible cause of death that would cause the symptoms described is exposure to arsenic. Arsenic was commonly used in many ways at the time. It was widely used in industry. It was available for purchase as a pesticide. In small doses, arsenic was even in vogue with women who used it to obtain shiny hair. A person who came into contact with it would start having muscular tremor and polyneurosis and damage to the kidney, the liver, and the heart muscle. This would cause damage to the blood vessels, mostly the capillaries, and lower the blood pressure. With disorder to the heart rhythms and to the nervous systems, functional changes occur that are followed by organic disorders. After 100 years, it is difficult to know what the cause was or wasn't, and speculating is no use. What we can state as a fact is that there are major inconsistencies in the myth of Hašek's dying due to alcohol, and there seem to be no major inconsistencies between the likely effects of arsenic exposure and the known circumstances of his last days. But only a toxicological analysis can ascertain if that is true. Whatever the facts may be, I hope that in this discussion and in the article we published in the journal Živa Historia, Professor Loskot and I have been able to demonstrate that Hašek's death occurred very differently from the way we have long been told, and that it is necessary, even imperative, to reconsider the evidence in a serious way and to reevaluate the fate of one of the great figures of Czech letters. It is long overdue. The 100th anniversary of his death will be next January. Let us be sure that it will not be commemorated in a way that perpetuates an old myth that may only be a smear on Jaroslav Hašek's memory.
Thank you so much, Professor Shaman, for your talk and for this fascinating look at one of the most basic facts about one of the greatest and most celebrated Czech writers. It certainly does shift the way we think about Hašek and his legacy. I want to open up the floor to questions from our audience. But before I do, I want to take my privilege as a moderator to throw in the first one. And that's just, how did you, as someone who on both sides of a brief career in intelligence, spent most of your career working on Eastern languages, What was it that brought you to the study of Jaroslav Hašek and to the circumstances of his biography?
Well, I read. I'm a Czech, and who is a Czech is a little bit of a Hašek. A little bit of a Švejk, I mean to say. My schoolmate, high school schoolmate, and very good friend, Antonín Měšťan, is the author of the history of 19th and 20th century literature. He was the head of the Slavistics department at the Freiburg universities. And we talked very often together. And I mentioned some of my doubts and asked my questions. And maybe it has something to do with the intelligence, I don't know. And I told him, look, podívej se, Tondo, look, Anthony, this and this and this doesn't make sense, you know? So he told me, get in touch with another schoolmate of ours, Frank Loskot, who became one of the most renowned cardiologists in the world. He also lectures in a number of universities. And also, he became the court-appointed expert on internal medicine in Germany. And we started digging into it. And he read everything, Loskot, Frada. Yeah? He read everything he could get his hands on about Hašek's death. And he came to certain conclusions, which he wrote on a number of pages. And we talked to Měšťan, and he was already seriously ill. He had cancer of the prostate. And he told me, Paul, you are right, but I'm too old, I'm too sick. I cannot pursue this matter. Do it with Loskot. And I did it.
Very good. So which school was that the three of you attended together?
Buenešovo reálné gymnázium na Velvarské ulici v Dejvicích.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So that's a remarkable sort of turn of events that came about from some high school friends from way back when.
Then we were meeting in Germany. We had meetings of émigrés, you know, and so on.
That's really remarkable. Well, the first question I see has come in the chat, and I encourage our audience, you may submit questions through the chat, or if you would like to deliver your question live, please use the hand-raising function so I can find you and we'll field your question that way. But the first question submitted in the chat, Paul, is asking whether, I just lost it, it just tripped off. Yes, whether there's been discussion about exhuming Hašek's body and doing a chemical analysis, I guess, of the hair is the place where you may find signs of poison and things like that.
Yes, this is a good question. I would say that as one precedes two and two precedes three and so on, we should limit ourselves, at least as far as I'm concerned, to finally recognizing that he did not drunk himself to death. If he didn't drunk himself to death, what was the cause of his death? That remains now an open question. And this would be up to the Charles University boy mystic, the Haškologist, the medical science in the Czech Republic, to dig into it and find out and try to find out after 100 years what I'm mentioning about arsenic is Professor Loskot's observation that can be and must be, I'm certain, medically must be taken into account. Then, if they want to pursue this avenue, toxicology, unfortunately, is the only thing to see whether there is a base for it. Now, Richard Hašek has what do you call it?
Cast, a plaster cast.
A cast, yeah? A gypsum cast of his right hand. He says there's one or more hair on it. I don't know. Maybe it can help. Probably not. I don't know. Then the next question is exhumation. And this is again up to Richard Hašek to agree or not to agree. There is a real chance to get an answer, but I am not the one who would decide or who would give an opinion. It is up to them.
Okay, our guest Jomar, thank you for a great presentation and is very glad that you mentioned Antonín Měšťan. Jomar has published 2 studies by Měšťan on his webpage, so that connection is made there. There was a question, I guess, about from someone who maybe is not as thoroughly read, but about Hašek's participation in the First World War. It's a little complicated, but maybe you could give us the short version.
Well, I'm convinced, and there are all reasons to believe that Hašek remained a convinced Marxist-Leninist communist. Yes, we know that he got genuinely angry, even in private, when someone attacked the Soviet Union or Bolshevism. It just was a conflict between his way of life and the discipline in the Soviet Union. Yes, and of course, he was, shall I say, pregnant with Švejk. Mm-hmm. And he could not deliver him in the Soviet Union, you can say. Yes? Because he's the one who initiated the trip to Kladno. He wrote letters where he was convincingly writing about his wish and his almost, I'm looking for the right word, let's stay with the word wish, to go there and help. And the Soviets needed at that time someone who would lead the Communist Party, because the Social Democratic Party had a left that was about to separate from the Social Democratic Party and would become the Communist Party. And you had there, for example, the future President Zapotocky and others, yes? And really, Hašek was the ideal man. He proved himself in Siberia, and the way he insisted to be sent there made him a perfect candidate, you see, for it. And with only a little bit fantasy, we can see that he would become the leader of the Communist Party, and after February 48, probably the president as Gottwald became it, you know. And here Hašek, the boy who was ridiculed as a clown, would become a president. Well, in Ukraine, they have also a clown, a president, but that's beside the point.
It's certainly a fascinating...
Or we're dragon. Well, never mind, let's not sidetrack.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thought experiment, of course, to imagine what would have happened had Hašek carried through some of these apparent plans that he had to advance communism in Czechoslovakia. The audience member who was asking about Hašek's First World War experience was wondering whether he might have contracted hepatitis. And whether that could be the type of disease that could be asymptomatic for a while and then recur later on.
Of course,
problems.
Of course. He was exposed to a number of diseases in Hungary, in the Balkans, and so on, even prior to World War I. He had problems, but they were all indispositions, temporary diseases, but it was not alcoholism. If you take any book on, or look in the Wikipedia for signs and symptoms, you will see that there is almost none that applies to him. Good memory, he had a pathological memory, yes? He could stop drinking when necessary. When the physicians told him after he returned to stop, he stopped. An alcoholic cannot do it. You see, and so on. Hallucinations. He didn't have hallucinations. He slept well, and so on. Yes. And it is up to, as I said, up to the Czechs now in Prague, Brno, I don't know where, to try to find out what they can find out. But alcohol did not do him in, as Eliza said it in My Fair Lady.
Yeah, a wonderful parallel. Yeah, very convincing. I see a question from, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, Tejas Salant. Would you please feel free to unmute and pose your question.
Hi, Professor Shaman. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just had a quick question about how does the current generation of Czechs, how do they view Hašek's work, and kind of tagging along with it, if new evidence comes to light, how do you think will that be received with the new generation? And I'm not from the Czech Republic, so I have no idea at all about any of it. So
now, this is a very good question, because I have not only the feeling, but I know that Hašek is not read as much, and Hašek and Švejk is not as much of a feature in everyday life today as it was at my time. When I worked in Prague in the 50s, I am not exaggerating if I tell you that every 10th person in the office had on his desk or her desk a glass, and underneath was Švejk walking with a pipe, shrapnels exploding all around him, and then to chce klid. Take it easy. Yeah? That was almost standard. You don't see it today. So, you know, time passes, you know. We are talking about a different chemistry, you see. But the traits, the basic traits are still there, yeah. You will find pubs u Švejka at least 10 of them in Prague, you know, but at a certain distance. But so if this answers the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anyone else with a question or comment on the issues that Professor Shaman has raised today? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything either in the chat. Yeah, Susanna.
Hi, I just cannot pass the opportunity that we have Yomar among us, and maybe he could tell us a little bit about his organization that is promoting and preserving Hašek's legacy. Yomar, are you there? You disappeared?
Okay. I was muted. Yeah, the International Hašek Society is very much an ad hoc organization. There's no formal structure. I just happened to be elected president during a Švejk maneuver in Przemysl in Poland. Richard Hašek was present. I don't know whose idea it was, but such an organization exists. But the organizer of it all is, I would say, Richard. I'm not there in any. I'm a figurehead.
That sounds a little bit like my position at the head of SVU, New York, really.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I'm glad to be able to contribute to the knowledge about Hašek. I've done some research. I've been digging in military archives, in the literary archive at Strahov, and I think together with my colleague, Švejkolog, Haškolog, Jaroslav Hašek in Prague, and also a Russian friend of ours, Vladimir Sovietov, we've been able to dig out quite a few things that weren't known maybe 20 years ago. So it's a great pleasure to be able to do this. It gives me a lot. And I met a lot of great people through this.
How many members and how many countries do you encompass?
I had no idea. We don't have a member list. It's anarchy, and it's intentional anarchy. But I can at least mention some countries. Hungary, Poland, very important. There's a lot of people in Poland they're also very active in organizing events. In Slovakia, we have people, obviously in the Czech Republic, in the so-called West, in the USA, Norway, classing as West as well, one. And we also have contacts in Germany and in Austria, but they're not very active. We got one real researcher in Germany. I'm so sad that Antonin Mieszczan is not amongst us anymore, because he was really digging into the details around Švejk.
Chris, maybe we should mention that we organized the Švejkathon last year.
Right. Yeah, as many of you know, follow us, we read the entire first part of Švejk continuously online, and part of that is available on YouTube, and hopefully we get the rest of it up before long. I see we have a hand up from Frank's computer. Do you have a question or a comment for us?
Oh, yes. Good afternoon, and thank you for setting this up. It was wonderful. Professor Shaman, in your research and the research of others that you're familiar with, was there any uncovering of a possible reason why the myth took hold, or was there anything, not sinister, but anything suspicious or questionable, or anybody with an agenda that would want to embed that myth as a meme through the last century?
Yes, you are asking, how did this myth generate? Yes?
Yeah, but anyone that would benefit from that? Any agenda?
That's a good question. That's a good question. A very good question. Yes. It is difficult to answer. He was a person who would sway a company in a pub. He was always the center of the attention. He would pay for everybody, you see, and if he ran out of money, he asked the pub owner to give him a piece of paper, and he quickly wrote a short story and told him, here, give it to the publisher, and what you get extra, keep as a tip, which of course proves that he was not an alcoholic, 100%, and he was in his senses. But he was a very colorful postavička, you say in Czech, a persona in the pubs. He, of course, with his activity, writing short stories and so on, and funny outcomes, like when he invented animals that don't exist, when he worked in a magazine dealing with animals, you know, he became something special and different from anybody else. And it just happened. It just happened. Yes, I don't know. There is no single person who could be held responsible for it. No, but it just happened. Yes.
Well, did this come out in journalism? This became like the way they characterized his death, that it was from alcoholism. You know, in the papers at the time, with the reports.
I am afraid I cannot answer your question.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
I see we have a question from Vít Hošej. Vít, would you like to turn on your microphone and camera and ask your question?
This idea about Hašek coming in with a false identity that was totally impossible to pass, I don't see how the commissars could be that naive.
Exactly. I agree with
So
you.
it seems like another prank from Hašek.
Yes. Yes.
So, and okay, so was it?
Now, as we said, Hašek was quite popular, very popular. He was popular in the pubs of Prague. He was popular as a story writer. He was popular everywhere. And he was known as a joker and as even a little bit of a escamoteur, you know. He was a person who was not taken seriously, would not be taken seriously in this particular role he was assigned by the Soviets. So something had to be done. And he convinced them that changing his name would do it. Of course, as we know, when he arrived in Prague, they got out of the railroad station. They took a coach. On the way to the hotel, he stopped. He asked the coachman to stop in front of the Unionka, a coffee house where he was going regularly. And in the moment he opened the door, everybody recognized him. And that was it. And there was the end of the identity Josip Stadl. And, oh, Hašek is here. And that was it.
Yes, Pete.
I may follow up. This doesn't answer my question. You were telling the story how the identity immediately disappeared, but my question was, how could anyone be so naive to think that that wouldn't happen? Hašek himself should know. This seems more like a dream of a totally drunk man, really, if he was going seriously with it. He must
Okay, the
have
answer
known
is
that it would never work.
yes, the answer is this. The comrades in Siberia were too detached from the reality. And he was convincing them too efficiently and too successfully. And he convinced them, obviously, because we see what happened, that if he changes his name, it will be enough. And they did not know about his popularity, you know. So that is the answer.
All right.
They issued a passport on the name Steidl. He got 1,500 German marks, which was shortly or about at the time when the mark devalued. And out of curiosity, I tried to find out what was the exchange rate at that time of the German mark compared to the dollar. And it turned out to be about 2 months subsistence. And when he met František Langer the day he arrived in Prague, and Langer offered him money, he said, Hašek replied, I have a couple of 100 crowns. Thank you, I don't need it. Yes.
Great. Jomar, you had some ideas to offer about Hašek's health?
Yeah, just a few things that could have been also been a contributing factor. First of all, I'd like to say I absolutely agree with Professor Shaman that alcoholism could not have been a primary cause of his death. That's just, you just have to read, it would have been written on the death certificate probably, and the whole story in the few months before rules it out. It's convincing. But now to another health issue that he had. Václav Menger, in his biography on Hašek as a young man, wrote that he had a heart condition. And also, I've seen in the military archive in Prague, there is a so-called militärärztliche Zeugung,
Yes.
where it says he suffered from what was I don't remember the exact German word for it. He definitely had rheumatism, that's written, but he also had some heart trouble.
Pardon
And
me?
the doctor wrote on his report that there is a sound from his left ventricular or something like that. I can always send you this document after. So
Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt that Hašek his heart wasn't exactly in the best shape. And I think this is the is the reason why he was deemed like waffenunfähig in the Austrian army. He didn't carry an arm. He was given lighter duties as a messenger. And interestingly, also in the legions, when he applied to join the legions or the Czechoslovak Brigade, as it was called in 1916. Again, he wasn't admitted as a normal soldier. So I'd never seen that document, seen why he wasn't admitted, but these are things to consider in the big picture. What may or may not have contributed to
Exactly. Of course, they don't relate to alcoholism as a reason for his death. And that is all we are saying. Now we have an open question, how and what caused his death at the age of 39, because we don't have anything specific. As we know, he was just taking aspirin. That was the only medication since he came back from the Soviet Union. And in the Soviet Union, he performed, to the best of our knowledge, he performed very well. You see?
He made a career.
There you are. And this is a long period of a couple of years. And then the same people sent him with such a demanding task, here.
Yeah.
So,
another health, another health problem could have been he contracted typhus twice in Russia, one in Totskoye in the camp, prisoners camp, and also in Ufa when he was already in the Red Army. And how much this affected his health, obviously, we don't know, but it's sort of a thing we should make a note of.
This is what Radko Pitlik says. He is one of those who nowhere associated his death with alcoholism. He always answers evasively. He had many problems. There are big questions asked, many questions are asked about his health, but he did not identify one particular problem.
No.
Reason for his death. And as we said, we have here a long period of 2 years in Russia. We have the Russians, the Soviets, sending him back to do a very demanding job, which you wouldn't do if you had someone who has problems, you see? And we see also what was going on with him in Prague and in Lipnice. And we come to the conclusion that alcohol it was not. And that is all we are trying to prove. And now it is up to the Czechs, the medical schools. They have very good schools, Homolka, the former, what was his name? What was the name of the Soviet, the communist, Sanops, the former Sanops. Sanops was a hospital, exclusive hospital for communist leaders in Prague. And it was then converted to a hospital, Molka, which is collaborating with Cleveland here. And it's an excellent hospital. So they have good physicians. By the way, Professor Loskot was teaching cardiology in the end of the 1800s and beginning 20th to the Sanops cardiologists who are now in Homolka. But that's by the way.
Okay, any additional questions or comments?
I just wonder, maybe that question was posed before, but I don't know if it was answered fully. Do you think that there was another agenda by some authorities, probably Soviets, to defame him this way, to present him as an alcoholic? Because he was in some way, Hašek was, even after his death, right, was he in some way uncomfortable for the Soviets?
Well, uncomfortable he could have been for other reasons, yes. But I don't think this would be, no. One could, with a little bit of a political paranoia, yes, one could say that the Soviets could have felt or must have felt uncomfortable when he didn't do what he was supposed to do. Yes. And even though Ratko Pitlik did really his best, his very best to rehabilitate him and find excuses for him. Yes.
But wasn't he then sort of on the way to write about the Švejk was about to go to Russia? In his
Say it again.
wasn't Hašek planning to write about Švejk going to Russia or Soviet Union?
Now that's another question.
Or is it a myth?
I agree with Antonin Neshtian. First of all, we know that Hašek remained a communist, a convinced communist. Yes. And if you see the stories of Bugulma and so on and so forth, you will see they are funny, but they don't have the needle find in the Austro-Hungarian section. The book ended accidentally, if you will, at the perfect place. If he kept on writing, it would most likely dilute the whole book, and the whole book would lose some of its literary value, you know, because he would not ridicule the Soviet Union. He could not. He was a convinced communist, and we saw the stories from Bugulma and so on, you see. Now, what you ask first, whether they felt, of course they must have felt uncomfortable, you know, because in the 20s, the Soviet Union had big illusions about political illusions. You know what happened in Hungary? Hungary became a Soviet republic for some time under Béla Kun. And it relates to Czechoslovakia because while they were a Soviet republic, they started invading Czechoslovakia in Slovakia. And the Czechs had to send French and Italian legions who came just back to push the Hungarians back. Yeah?
Yeah.
But Hungary became a Soviet republic. Even the ultra-conservative Switzerland was not immune to communism. There is a bestseller now in France, La Suisse Bolchevique, where they talk about the Soviet Republic that was established in Alton at the age of 8, at the end of 18, where the Social Democratic Swiss Party, the left wing, organized big strikes, which the police with difficulties controlled. There were 4 deaths and tens of wounded people. And then they reacted by forming a Helvetic Soviet Republic. And they even nominated a president. You know whom? Karl Radek. Do you know the name? He was one of the companions of Lenin in Zurich. You know that Lenin was with his groups in Zurich. And the Germans got them to Petersburg when Lenin promised that he would sign peace with Germany, and so on and so forth. So they must have been afraid, of course, what is he going to do? But he behaved. In the Chairman Seven, Red 7, he was entertaining people. He was talking about countryside, how nice it is, about the people in Mongolia, and so on and so forth, but never criticized. Yeah. Of course, particularly when they heard of him not coming back and distancing himself from the movement, they must have been concerned, yes.
Thank you.
Yomar added to the chat that Hašek was indeed planning to have Švejk continue in the further adventures in the legions and in the Russian Civil War. So one can imagine that the Bolsheviks might have been apprehensive of how that might look in a novel.
Yes. And he was a traitor. He was a traitor. He never contacted anybody from the left, anybody.
Could I add a few things here? He did write for Rude Pravo quite a few articles in 21.
Thank
so
you.
He must have had some contacts, but
yeah.
not politically active, no.
Yes. Thank you.
Could I also add a few things about others who might have felt uncomfortable? I think certain people in the legions weren't looking forward to what he might write. He did, after all, write the story, the Czech Pickwick Club, which is very, very harsh, as biting as Švejk, I would say.
Yeah.
So maybe the people who actually issued an arrest order on him in Omsk, for instance, Judge Eisenberger, he wouldn't have been pleased, I'm sure. But I don't think there's any more to it. They probably weren't looking forward to it.
Yes. Yes. Well, it was a pleasure.
I see Richard is among us. Can we bring him in and say hi? Richard Hašek?
Já bych rád tady srdečně pozdravil vaše jednání tady z Prahy a de facto z detašovaného Lipnice. A jsem velice rád, že jste vlastně tuto konferenci uskutečnili, nebo uskutečňujete sice teď, ale zároveň děkuji za to, jak jste to bezvadně připravovali a diskuze, že byla, a jsem tomu velice rád.
Because there was this question about the toxicology, right? About the hair, left hair. So where is it? Where is this? Jak jste na tom s tím vyšetřením toho, ty DNA, nebo ne DNA, ty toxicology z toho vlasu, který máte někde uschovaný?
Že vy o tom víte něco? To se divím. Je to taková choulostivá věc, samozřejmě.
Aha, tak nechcete o tom mluvit.
Ale tak jako...
No, jak jinak dokážete, co chcete dokázat, jo? How else will you prove, you know, what you're trying to prove?
Já sice bych rád řadu věcí vyřešil, ale já myslím, že to není ta otázka správná v tom smyslu, že bych měl rozdělit to, jestli byl anebo nebyl nějakým způsobem
zlikvidován.
No. Nechme to tak, abychom...
to jsem nemyslel.
Ať pravda, jakákoliv, jo, zůstane tak, jak je, a román, byť nedokončen, ať žije svým vlastním životem.
But your organization, Richard and Yomar, you do pursue the debunking the myth, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, proactively.
Yeah.
So with the anniversary, people will hear about that Hašek has not died as an alcoholic.
I don't think any serious Hašek researcher thinks he died as an alcoholic, but amongst the general public and maybe even in academia, the impression still lingers that he died due to alcohol.
Well, it is a unique grandfather of the satiric anti-war novel. Yes, and as such it will remain. You know.
I hope that our program today has done something to set the record straight. Thank you again so much, Paul, for your presentation, and thank you again to our distinguished guests, to Richard and to Jomar. It was wonderful to have your contributions. And so I invite you all to join us again, SBU, for our next online edition on the 27th. We'll be back with that one on Cold War athletics issues, and wish everyone a great rest of your Sunday.
Bye-bye.